Hi, I'm Jessica with Ellie and Mac, and today we're going to be learning how to make this sprocket pillow. It's such a fun little Scrapbuster pillow. There are 3 sizes included. This is the smallest. This is the 13-inch. There's also a 15-inch and a 17-inch pillow. What's fun about it is that all of these little wedges come all the way around to make up the full circle. And then we add a nice button in the middle. On the back, you can do the same wedges, or you can do a solid back and a button on this side as well. There is a gusset in between, which gives this like some extra width to the pillow. And there's also an option to put a handle on top. What's kind of fun about the bigger size pillow with this gusset and the handle is that it can also be meant for like sitting on, or even for pets to lounge on. This originally was brought to us by someone that said they wanted to have one of these in their grandkids' tent and have it like be this fun little pillow that they cart around inside the tent. So let's get started today. This one is like a fun, obviously like spring, flowery, feminine look. But for this next one, I'm gonna do the 15-inch. And I'm going to do it in more of home decor fabrics. So it will be for the living room. So you can kind of go with whatever theme you want, if you want it to be childlike or kind of flowery, or more like upholstery fabrics like this one. Our testers have made a whole bunch, so make sure you check all those out too to get ideas for how to make your pillow. Okay, let's get started. First of all, I have all my pieces cut, but I'm going to go and show you a couple things when I was cutting to think about and to mark, and then I'll show you how to get our interfacing on, and we'll get started sewing. If you decide to use the solid back, you can go ahead and mark your center line right now. On the print file, this is on a fold, but you'll still be able to mark right here at the sides and the button placement. And then if you rotate the pillow back and you align the top and bottom, and make sure you have these aligned, or you can even fold it like that first and make sure you've got it aligned. You can mark these 2 sides as well, and then you'll have all your quarter points marked at the beginning. If you don't, I'll show you again how to do that later. If you are sewing the handle, you'll need to mark where to put the interfacing and where to put the handles on both sides here of the center line. If you're using the print file, you'll only see half of this, so make sure you mark it on both sides of your center line. You can, fold it this right here and then flip it over so that you have that handle marking on both sides. Okay, we're here at the ironing board. I'm gonna let my iron warm up while we talk about the pieces real fast. As far as your wedges go, you can decide to do all different wedges all the way across, or you can pick, a couple of colors. So I did the 15-inch pillow, which means I needed 12 of these to make one side. So I did 3 different fabrics with 4 wedges each. So this is very customizable of how you want to do it. I kind of like the ones that had like this theme, but I also like the ones that had just 2 colors. That looked really nice. And you could even do all 1 color if you wanted to, and just have it have like sort of style lines. So those are the ones that I picked. Now, if you're doing the handle, you are going to have a couple extra interfacing pieces. This one and this one are for your handle. So for the inside of the handle, you need some interfacing that's a little bit stiffer. And for underneath the handle, you can have a light to medium weight interfacing. And this is just so that the handle is stiff when you pick it up and that it doesn't pull out of the gusset. So we need both of those. The one last piece of interfacing that everybody needs if they're doing a solid back is one that goes underneath the button. And that's just so that the button doesn't rip out of the fabric. We want to secure that button on really well if you're doing the solid back. If you're doing the wedge on both sides, it would be difficult to get this interfacing onto that wedged area. And also you have a number of fabrics that are all coming together at that middle part, which should keep it more secure. So here's my gusset, and I have the markings here for the handle. And then you can see that the under handle interfacing would need to go right under this. So here's my under handle interfacing piece. We need to, on the wrong side of this fabric, which the fabric I'm using doesn't really have a wrong side, so make sure on yours, if you have it on the wrong side, that we align this piece of interfacing so that it goes at the placement markings, which would also be right under this handle, right? So it's kind of centered here in the middle. And just make sure it covers where the handle markings will go. I have the bumpy part where the adhesive is on the interfacing down to the wrong side of the fabric. And I'm going to grab my iron, and I have it, I'm going to turn this down actually to about wool. And then we're going to place it on the fabric and count to about 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that should be pretty well stuck on already. We'll do it here on this side too, of course, all the way across the interfacing. And then I just like to give it a little steam puff and go over and just make sure that that's really well fused onto the fabric. If you have any edges peeling up, make sure that you go back over those. And then let this cool before you just go and start playing with it. You need to make sure that this interfacing cools down and completely fuses to the fabric before you move on. Okay, here's my solid back piece, and I have my marking right here in the center for the button. And that's exactly where we need to make sure that we put this little scrap of interfacing under the button. So put this on the wrong side. This is the wrong side of my fabric. I'm going to have the bumpy side again down. Center it right there. And then we'll take our iron and do the same 10-second count. And that looks great. Make sure that wherever you marked it is still marked, and then we can move on. If you're doing the handle, you can go ahead and put your interfacing for that on now. So on the wrong side of the handle, we're going to grab that scrap of interfacing and center it right in the middle of the handle. If you aren't sure where the middle is, you can just quickly fold it in half, put a little crease line in there so that you can center that piece right on the center of the fabric. Make sure that your bumpy side is down toward the wrong side of the fabric, and then go ahead and fuse that on. Great, now that piece will be ready for when we need to build the handle. Okay, the first thing we want to do with all our wedges is lay them out in the position that we want the pillow to look at the end. So I think with mine, I'm just going to put, each color next to each other and then do it again. So we've got, on mine, I have the brown, the floral, and the light brown, the dark brown, the floral, and the light brown, and just keep going around until I have all of these in position. Once you have those all in position the way you want the pillow to be laid out, you can choose to take a picture if it's complicated so that you can reference back to it later, because we're going to be sewing each of these pieces and then put them back in the same layout to make sure they stay the same. So once you have what you want, we're going to pair these into groups of 2. So make sure all your pieces are, first of all, right side up, and then we're going to just flip one over on another and pin or clip the pieces together. And if it's confusing, like, should I be going this way or should I be going this way? You can kind of lay this back out and then think about that. Like, we need these two edges to go together, so we don't want this one sewn yet. We want these two sides, right? So go ahead and flip that one and then pin or clip that together. And as you go, you can kind of flip these out to make sure it's that same pattern that you had. So mine was light brown, dark brown, floral, light brown, dark brown, floral. So it looks good so far. Continue clipping all the way around, and then we'll come back. Once you have all of them clipped, you can flip them just out like this, clipped or pinned, I should say. Not everyone likes clips. Some people love to use pins, and whatever you love is great. But you can flip them out like this and just double check that everything is in the right order again. If you took a picture, you can look at that. But you remember mine was light brown, dark brown, floral, light, dark, floral, light, dark, floral, light, dark, floral. So mine is in the correct order. Make sure that yours is. And then we're going to take these to the sewing machine and we're going to sew all of them. If you'd like to chain stitch these, you can. And what chain stitching is that we're going to sew it from this side to this side, and then without cutting or snipping, we're going to put the next one in. But make sure that you're still back stitching at the front and back of each of these, and before we move on to the next one, and I'll show you here in just a second. But we're going to go ahead and sew all of the wedges pairs together. Okay, for each of these, I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which on mine, I can line up right here with the edge of my foot. We're going to start at the skinny end and go to the fat end of each of these wedges. So I'm going to go ahead and line that up. Make sure that you sew all the way to the tip. So I'm going to start it. You see I back stitched, and then I'm going to go ahead and sew right off the fabric. And without cutting it, without cutting the thread, I'm going to put the next wedge in. Alternatively, you can lift your presser foot, pull the thread, then put your next one in. Once you have them all stitched, of course, if you chain stitched, you'll need to cut the threads in between each of them. Next, we're going to open up all the seams and press them open with the iron. Make sure that you press them open and not to one side. That just reduces the bulk. So I'm going to open up each of these seams. As you can see, this upholstery fabric likes to fray, so I have to be a little more careful with mine. If you're using quilting cotton, you're not going to have this issue. So you're going to press it from the back and then from the front on all of the pairs. Once you have all those sewn and pressed open, you're going to put them back in the original layout that we had at the beginning. And then we're going to work on each half. So on this half, we're going to put these two right sides together and pin or clip. And then we're going to go ahead and sew that. Remember that you need to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance and start at the skinny end here. And then once you have that all sewn, you can open it up. And then you can add this one to this side. Put those right sides together and pin or clip. And then we're going to do the same thing. Sew it at a 1/4 inch seam allowance from the skinny end. And once we have that all sewn up, it will be half. Okay, I've got the whole half sewn together. I'm going to go ahead and sew this other side. And then we need to make sure that we press those additional seam allowances here and here open before we move on. So on this other side, you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to put 2 pairs right sides together, sew that, and then you put this pair on. You can't really do the same at this like all at once because you've got this end piece. So if you were to try to put that on and then put that on, you're kind of running into each other. So that's how we have to do it one at a time. But I'll go ahead and pin or clip this one and go sew it, and then we'll finish up our second half. If you are making the 17-inch pillow, remember that you have a couple extra more than I do. So make sure you get all of the ones that you need to make the entire half of your circle. Okay, you should have now both of your halves sewn together, and on the back, make sure that you've pressed all of your seam allowances open. Right here at the end, we're going to have a bunch of fabric. We can just go ahead and grab our scissors and cut straight across to remove some of that bulk right here at the center. Make sure you're not cutting through any of your stitches and that you cut only straight across. And that way it won't be quite so bulky right there at the center. Because my fabric is fraying so bad here, and around the edges, I'm going to go ahead and serge those areas. You do not need to do this if you're not using fabric that's coming apart like mine. Most of the time, your edges of your fabric are going to look like this. This has a very, not a very tight weave and a very thick fabric, so that's the reason this type of upholstery fabric does this. So I'm going to go ahead and serge those, and then what we're going to do is put these right sides together like this and pin or clip all along here, and then we're going to sew our 2 halves together. This will still be at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, now I go ahead and press that last seam open. And don't worry if this center part doesn't look perfect. Mine doesn't look perfect this time because of all that fraying fabric, but guess what? We're gonna put a button right here, and you're not gonna see any of that mistake right there. It'll just be all covered up. So do your best to try to get that 1/4 inch seam allowance, but if it's not perfect right here in the center, nobody will know. Okay, if you also cut wedges for your back, you'll need to repeat this whole process to make the back of your pillow. If not, and you're doing the solid back, then we can just move on. And if you're doing the handle, move on with me right now. If you're not doing the handle, you can skip this part. Okay, if you're making the handle, you're going to grab your handle piece and make sure that you have the interfacing already on there. What we're going to do is we're going to fold the handle wrong sides together along that long edge. Give that a good press, and then we'll have our center crease. Next, we're going to take one side and long side and fold it into that center crease and press. Then we'll do the same on the other side. So you want both of them to fold in and just touch right here in the middle. Next, we're going to fold it again, wrong sides, in half. That way, all of our raw edges that are fraying in here are going to be covered up. And we're going to press that really nicely. Okay, once you have all those raw edges folded in and you have all of this pressed nicely, we're going to open it back up and we're going to grab these short ends and tuck them to the wrong side and press them. Make sure you do this on both sides. And then we're going to fold it all back up how we had it, but with these short ends folded in there as well. So get those nicely folded in. That way the raw edges will all be encased inside. Right, next we're going to take this over to the sewing machine, and starting with this open edge, we'll sew a stitch 1/8 of an inch from the edge all the way down. Make sure you back stitch on both ends. Then you can do this the not open end, and the same thing 1/8 of an inch from this side. And then you can take a stitch right down the center right here. Okay, so I have my 3 lines of stitching here, and I used a stitch length of just over 3. And if you have a presser foot pressure dial, then you can reduce that pressure just a little bit. And that's what I did for mine. So there is our nice handle. Okay, on your gusset, if you haven't already marked where the handle should go and put the interfacing on, then you need to do that. So we're going to go ahead and line up the edges of the handle with the placement markings from the pattern so that it looks like this. Now, if your handle, like your stitching looks better on one side or the other, you can just flip it to that side. But it will look like this. It should have just a little bit of bowing here in the middle so that you can reach under the handle and grab it. So if you can get a pin through this handle, go ahead and do that. And we're going to pin it into place. If you can't get a pin in, you can just hold it here and then do the stitching line. What we're going to do is we're going to make a box. So we're going to do like a rectangle that's the same size as the marking here. So you can stitch down, across, up, and back, and that will make a rectangle. And then we want to put an X. So from this corner down to that corner, and from this corner down to that corner. Now, when you're stitching this, sometimes you might be thinking, oh, should I go back over the stitches I already did, or should I back stitch and then do the X? I don't think there's a right way here. You can do it however you like. What I'm probably going to do is go down, across, back up, and over. And then without doing any back stitching, I'll make this X. And then I'll go across this one more time and make this X and then back stitch at the end. And you want to do that for both sides of the handle so it's nice and secure on the gusset. Now, if you get to a point like this and you realize that one more stitch will get you off the handle, what you can do is actually just reduce the stitch length. So I'm going to put this down to like 2 and then go ahead and make another stitch. And do you see how it's now in the fabric? And then I'm going to increase my stitch length back to about 2.8 on mine. And then we'll come this way. And I have my markings here, so I'm going to go right here to the edge of that. That way on both sides, the boxes will look the same. And then we're going to go ahead and turn again. And then we'll go across that X part. And if you'd like to draw a line down this way, because you have a hard time aiming at that corner right here, you can go ahead and draw that in. I'm just going to go for it. And then we'll go across, again across this one we already stitched, just following those stitch lines right over top. And then we'll make the opposite diagonal line down to this corner here. And there we are. We have a very secure handle, and we'll just do the same thing on the other side. Make sure that you have that little bit of, gap in the middle. So you pull this back to that placement line. And you should have your handle on now. Okay, if you didn't do a handle, or if you did do a handle, this is where you move on. So we're gonna take our gusset and we're gonna put the short ends right sides together and pin or clip. And then we're going to go ahead and sew right across that short end. But this time we're going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. This is where we switch from 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch seam allowance for the gusset. So go ahead and do this one. That's 1 centimeter for you metric folks. After you've sewn that, if you'd like, you can press that seam open. Next, we're going to go ahead and quarter the gusset. So if you've got that handle, you're going to kind of have to play with, because it's stiff, you have to play with making sure that you get the right quarter here. So basically, you're going to put a pin or clip on both sides of the seam that we just made, like that. And then we're going to extend the gusset out. And where it folds on the opposite side from the seam, we're going to add another pin or clip right here where it's folding on my hand on both sides of the gusset. So I'm going to go ahead and do them one at a time since my handle is kind of making it hard. So I'm going to have this clip right here at the seam pulled out straight. And then on this side, I've got where I'm going to put that other clip or pin. You can also choose, if you'd like, instead of using a pin or clip, where it's folded, you can use your scissors and make a tiny little triangle just by cutting right across that edge, and you will get exactly where that is. And you can see that I've actually already marked that, so that is the right spot for it, right here on both sides. If you'd like to add the pin or clip to make sure that you know where it is, you can certainly do that. Now what we're going to do is line up those 2 quarter points we just made right here at the center, and where the edges are folded out, that's where our 3rd and 4th quarter points are. And again, you can mark those however you like. You can even use a marking pen if you prefer. I'm just going to go ahead and do the little snips and make sure you do them on both sides of the gusset and on this side, both sides. Okay, now you should have all 4 quarter points marked on the gusset. And now we're going to find the 4 quarter points of the solid back and or the quilted fronts or backs. So on mine, I've actually already found these quarter points because I marked them on the pattern. But what you can do if you haven't marked them is you're going to fold it in half like this. And where it lines up here at the sides is where you're going to mark that quarter point. And again, you can do pins, clips, marking pen, or snips, however you like. And where it's folded, that is the 2 quarter points. And after you have those marked, you can flip it the opposite direction. Line up the 2 quarter points you just marked. Make sure all your sides are really well lined up here, like all along the edge. And then you can mark this quarter point. And on this side, this quarter point. And at the end, you should have all 4 quarter points marked on your circle. And then we're going to do the same thing if you are using the quilted back. Now on this one, you can decide where do you want the top to be. Like if you want the top to have this or this with the handle up there, you can think about that. If you don't care, you can just put it, wherever you like. And then you can decide if you want the top to have a seam or if you want it to be like angled like this. And then like the top is maybe like in the middle of one of these. It doesn't really matter. So I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and just fold it along that seam line that we did here. That way I know that it's straight. And then we're going to fold it the opposite direction, making sure that you line up those 2 first marks. And then you can put a pin or clip or marking on the opposite 3 and 4 fold points and quarter marks. Okay, now you have all the quarter points marked. What do you think we're going to do next? Yeah, we're going to put the gusset on here, matching up those quarter marks. The first thing we need to do is on our gusset, we're going to go all the way around, making little tiny snips into the gusset. Now you don't want to make these like super far, so make sure you're not like putting your scissors in and then snipping. You only want that very edge snipped, just like this. And you can space them out somewhere around, a 1/2 inch. It's like, about 1.5 centimeters, something like that. And just make them about 1/4 inch deep. Our seam allowance on this is 3/8 inches or 1 centimeter. So we just don't want to cut in further to where we would hit that seam allowance. So go ahead and do this on this side of the gusset. And when you're all done with this side, you'll flip it and do the opposite side here on the gusset. Okay, we're going to start with the back here. And on the back, if you're doing the solid back, you need to make sure that you have that interfacing there for the button and the button placement marked so that you know where the center is. We're going to take our gusset and whatever side you decide to be the bottom, we'll take that seam and we'll put it right sides together with the bottom right here and pin or clip that into place. And then we're going to find the next clip here or marking, and we'll put it on the next quarter point on the back. Match those up, right sides together, and then we'll do the 3rd and 4th quarter point the same way. And I didn't clip that one, so that was We doing the wrong thing there. Let's match up the correct quarter points here. Okay, and make sure that that's like all along one edge of the gusset and you don't have the gusset flipped anywhere. Next, we're going to, in between each of those quarter points, ease the gusset into the back round. So the reason that we made all of those snips is so that we could ease that in, because the gusset fits exactly at the seam allowance, but it doesn't necessarily fit exactly at the edge of the fabric. So you can kind of pull that and ease that in so that it's evenly distributed around the back. And then I'm going to put one clip here next to this seam for the gusset. And then beyond that, we're going to leave about a 5-inch gap in our pinning. So I'm going to ease that straight first, and we'll add a clip or pin right here. And so you just want to be able to make sure that you can get your hand into that gap. If your hands are larger, you might want to leave a bigger gap. And then go ahead and ease the rest of the gusset all the way around. Okay, once you have it pinned or clipped with as many clips or pins as you think you need, we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we'll start here or here. I'm going to go all the way around, but we're not going to sew up this gap right here. That will leave open for stuffing later. So all the way around here, and remember we're using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And you want to sew with the gusset on top. That way, if there's any point in which you're like, oh, the gusset's just not fitting in this spot, you can make an extra couple snips there. So I'm going to remove that one pin right at the start of my gap. And actually on the back side of the gap, I'm going to double clip that. You could put 2 pins in on an X so that you remember to stop right there. And then we're going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Maybe it's a helpful tip to notice that the gusset is straight and the back here is round. So instead of pulling this over here, which I could do, that's one way, I'm actually just pulling the rounded part toward me underneath. But either way you like to do it is fine. And just make sure that that stays aligned as you go around at that seam allowance. Oh, got our double clip, so we're going to go ahead and back stitch here. And that's it for now. Okay, next we're going to trim down the seam allowance, but do not trim it where the gap is. Only around the parts that you sewed. I'm going to use pinking shears. If you don't have pinking shears, you can use regular shears so that the gusset lays nicely when you're finished. But you're going to go all the way around and cut the seam allowance down to about half. Okay, we're getting closer to being done. So next we're going to go ahead and put the front onto the gusset. We need to put it right sides together. So you can see this is the back of my gusset. So here's the right side. And we're going to line up our quarter points from our front with our gusset. If you had a side that you wanted to be the top, you can line those up that way. I didn't really have a side that I cared about. So we're going ahead and put those right sides together and pin or clip each of the quarter points into place. And then after we get these clipped into place, we are going to ease the rest of the gusset around the front. But this time we don't need to leave a gap. So we're just going to go all the way around at that 3/8 inch seam allowance, and we're going to sew with the gusset on the top. So when you put it into the sewing machine, you want to sew it this way with the gusset on top, again, so we can make those additional snips if needed. So go ahead and ease each of these into place and then sew all the way around. After you have that all sewn up, we need to go ahead and trim the seam allowance on the seam that you just sewed as well. And again, I'm going to use picking shears, but you can use regular shears, and you're going to cut down that seam allowance to about half all the way around. Okay, once you have that trimmed down, you're going to find that gap in the back and turn the whole project right side out. And hopefully it looks so cute. I'm excited to see mine here, and I'm excited to see yours. Make sure you go and post yours in our Facebook group or tag us on Instagram or TikTok. All right, I think that looks great. I am so excited. How fun. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is add our buttons, and then we'll stuff it and close it, and we'll be all done. How fun. Okay, I'll be right back with a button and some thread. Now you can use all-purpose polyester thread, or if you think you need something a little stronger, you can use thicker thread. So I have all my buttons here because I was trying to pick the one that I think matches the best. And don't you think like picking the fabric and then picking, you know, your extras like your buttons or zippers or hardware is always the hardest part. It's the hardest part for me. Is that the hardest part for you too? Let me know in the comments. Okay, so I have a hand needle here and some all-purpose polyester. And I'm gonna go ahead and thread that needle. And when you're sewing a button on, you always double over the thread. So I'm gonna give myself quite a lot here, just so I have enough. And then at the end, I'm gonna have two threads like this. At the end, I'm going to tie them off. So the way that we do that is you're gonna put it around your fingers like this. And we want to make a big enough knot here at the end so that when we put the needle through, we don't lose the thread too. We need to make it big enough that it's like basically the thickness of the needle, right? So if we went and just did one knot, it wouldn't be big enough. So what I like to do is I make that first knot and then I go around again and again. And depending on how big your needle is and how thick your thread is, you may need to do it more or less, but that's what, about 5 times? I didn't count. And then get it off my finger. Try to get it kind of up near the end here. You can leave just a little bit of thread beyond the knot. Maybe you can see how that made a thick knot here. And then that way, when we go through, hopefully, it won't pull all the way through the fabric. So that gap that we left, you can stick your hand through there. And the reason we're doing it now and not after we stuff it is it's just difficult to get a little needle through here, and a big needle, it's just making a big hole in your fabric. So I'm going to come up right in the middle there. And I'm going to put that through one of the holes of my buttons. Now, depending on what kind of button you have, of course, this will look different. So I'm going to come up, and then I'll go down. On this particular button, I have 4 holes, so I'm going to go across the diagonal here. On the top of our button, we do want it to not be like loose. But when we go back through the fabric, we don't want to pull this all the way tight because we need to add just a little bit of play in the button to make sure that it's not sucked all the way down into the pillow. So I'm going to pull it back through, and I'm going to leave, you know, about a 1/2 inch of play here in the button. And then on the other side, I'm going to grab my needle and come up right through that center spot right there. And on this side, we're going to put our other button. So this is why we need a lot of thread, so we can make sure we can do both sides. So up and then down through the other hole, and then back through that center part here. And what's nice about this gap too, without it being stuffed, is you can stick your hands in there and do what you need to do. So again, on this side, we're going to leave about a 1/2 inch of play in that button, and then we'll come back over and we'll just keep going back and forth. So you can go back and forth between the two buttons, you know, maybe like 4 times, and then just focus on one button and then the other. That way there'll be, you know, a lot of thread in the middle so that your buttons aren't going to come undone, but you won't be having to go back and forth so many times. Okay, so now I'm just going to focus on this one button, go through the button once more. And this time when I come up, instead of going through the buttonhole, we're going to come up through the fabric. And then we're going to go around this button about 6 times in a circle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that will create a shank for our button. And then we can go back down through the fabric to secure that shank. And if you've got any loose threads on this top part, you can try to pull those through just so that your button looks nice. But we're going to stuff that, and all of those threads should be taut. So now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Finish off this button by going through about 6 times, and then do that shake by going around the button 6 times and then back through the fabric, and then make sure you tie off really well. Okay, all we have left to do is stuff it and close it. So grab your fiber fill. I'm using polyfill. And the trick to this is to use small clumps at a time. And you can stuff them in as far away from the gap first, and then make your way toward the gap with it. You're probably going to need to use more than you think. It just seems like you get the polyfill in there and you're like, oh, that's enough. And then you like start kind of squishing it around and making it look right. And then you're like, oh, that's not enough. So just put a little bit more than you think you need in here. Okay, once you have it all stuffed how you like, you can grab a lint roller and clean up the mess. I love having a lint roller in my sewing room. I think it is very, very helpful. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and close up that gap. So how do we do that? You can use pins or clips for this part. And what you're going to do is fold the fabric along this line. If it's helpful, you can go press this at the seam allowance, so 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter. fold it to the wrong side and press that. I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. And the same on this side. Okay, after we've got it all nice and ironed, we can go ahead and put it together. So we want to keep that seam allowance as it was, and then we're going to pin or clip it along here. And because the seam allowance on both of these are the same, they should all align. But if you have any issues, you might just kind of have to ease just a little bit. Okay, and that should be all ready to then sew up with our ladder stitch. So we're going to grab some thread, double it over on a needle, and get started. Okay, once you have everything pinned or clipped, you have a couple options. You can choose to mark it, or you can choose to not mark it. But essentially what we're going to do is right where we made that fold right here is where we're going to be putting the needle through the fabric on both sides. So if you'd like, where you made that crease, you can put a little line to show it easier. And this is a little hard to do, but just do your best. And on both sides, if your fabric is creased really well, you can kind of see it. You don't have to do this part, but you can kind of see that on mine right here at the end. I didn't do a very good job of ironing it, so it's going to be a little bit like that. And then with a ruler, you can choose to make marks every 1/8 to 1/4 inch. That's about 3 to 6 millimeters. You just want them to be even all along. So if I choose to do, put this out to here, if I choose to do a 1/4, I can do one here, and then another one, and another one, and another one. And we want to mark that on both sides. So we have that on the one side, and we can mark it across to our other side as well. And then just you can continue to make marks, and then hopefully you'll start to get a feel for how far apart the stitching is. Or you can choose to continue to make marks all the way across. I'm using a Friction pen. This pen, if you apply any heat or steam at all, it's just gonna disappear. In fact, sometimes not in a good way, because you make a mark and it just disappears on you. Okay, the needle is threaded, and I have knotted the back in the same way we did for the button. It's pretty long, and I'm going to start so that I can hide the knot on the end. I'm going to start by putting it up through fabric here on one side, from the wrong side to the right side. And that way our knot should be hidden inside. And I'm going to just tuck that tail down in there. Okay, so I'm over here on the bottom side, the bottom of this, and I want to go to the top. So the next stitch I'm going to make, I'm going to come through parallel to the first one, so right across, go into the fabric, and then come out at that first marking, which on mine is 1/4 inch away. Go all the way up. And then on the bottom side, I'm going to go parallel to where we came out from that stitch and go in on this side. And all along, I'm trying to do it right where that fold is, where I creased it with the iron, or if you marked it, and then come out through the next stitch marking. And then we're going to go right across, parallel, in, and then out at the next marking. In, and then out. And you're just going to continue to do this all along. And what you should get is disappearing thread inside there and a closed seam at the end. Sometimes you might get a little looping, and what I like to do is, since we have doubled over thread, it's going to be that one of the threads is doing the looping. So get them nicely untangled from the bottom, and then you want to pull on one side of the thread, one thread, and then the other, and that should get any loops out that you see. See, it was that one that needed to be pulled, and now those look a little bit better. And then you can continue along. Okay, once you've got everything stitched, you get to the end here. What you can do is actually go back the same way you can. So right now I'm on the top. I'm going to go back into the bottom along the same stitch line that I just made and come out. But this time, instead of just coming straight out, see how there's this loop here? I'm going to take the needle and put it through the loop, and that will tie the thread. And you can do that a couple of times. I'm going to go back up this way and then put the needle into the loop. And we'll do it once more. And then there's a couple different options here. You can either just cut the thread off here toward the needle and then tie a square knot. Or if you'd like, what you can do is actually just put the needle in through the hole and then out somewhere else in the pillow. Pull it all the way through. Grab your scissors and pull it till it's like too tight. That way when you cut the thread, then the thread will just go right back into the pillow, and you'll have a bit of an extension inside there to keep it from untying. And then you can, if you made marks, just go get those off with the iron, and your pillow is all finished. Well, I love how my Sprocket pillow turned out. I hope that you love yours too. Let us know in the comments how it went, and we'll see you next time.